The city was alive that night, buzzing with lights and laughter, but for Edward Harlan, a millionaire whose name dominated business circles, none of it mattered. He sat alone in a luxurious restaurant, a glass of wine in hand, staring blankly at his half-eaten meal. To the outside world, Edward had everything: power, wealth, respect, even envy from his rivals. But inside, he carried an emptiness no riches could fill. Each bite of his expensive dinner tasted bland, a reminder that he had no one to share his life with. His success had come at the price of companionship. He glanced around at the happy couples, the laughing families, and felt the isolation weigh heavier than the diamond cufflinks on his sleeves. Just as he pushed his plate away, a quiet, trembling voice reached his ears. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" The words were timid yet steady, and Edward turned sharply, surprised. Standing by his table was a young woman, her clothes threadbare, her hair dripping with rainwater. Her face carried signs of hardship, but her eyes, those eyes, held a mixture of hope and dignity. For a man accustomed to polished boardrooms and artificial smiles, the raw honesty in her gaze pierced his heart. The restaurant grew hushed as patrons stared, waiting for him to dismiss her. After all, who would dare approach a man like Edward in such a place, asking for scraps? But something miraculous happened in that moment. Edward's cold exterior melted as he studied her. "Sit down," he said, his voice softer than even he expected. The girl blinked, startled. "No, I only meant," she hesitated, ashamed, "I just wanted what you weren't going to eat." Edward pushed the plate back toward the center, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Please, join me." Murmurs rippled through the room, some shocked, others amused, but Edward didn't care. Slowly, almost fearfully, the girl sat down. She began eating cautiously, her hands trembling as if afraid she might be asked to leave at any second. But Edward signaled the waiter and ordered more food, his tone firm. "Bring her whatever she'd like." Her protest died on her lips when she saw the sincerity in his eyes. For the first time in days, she tasted a real meal, and for the first time in years, Edward felt like he wasn't eating alone. As the dishes arrived and she ate with quiet gratitude, Edward leaned forward. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering softly, "Anna." He noticed the way she said it, like someone who wasn't used to being remembered. He didn't ask about her past right away. He simply listened as she spoke in fragments, sensing her pride mixed with pain. And the more he listened, the more he realized this wasn't about feeding a stranger. Something much deeper was happening. Later, as they left the restaurant together, Edward offered her a ride. Anna refused at first, embarrassed, but when he insisted, she admitted she had nowhere to go. She pointed quietly toward a bridge in the distance. "There," she said, "that's where I sleep." The words hit Edward harder than any business loss he had ever suffered. He couldn't bear the thought of her returning to that cold, wet blanket under the bridge. "Come with me," he said. She shook her head firmly. "I don't want pity." His voice softened. "This isn't pity, it's kindness. Please." At last, she agreed. When they arrived at Edward's mansion, Anna's eyes widened at the chandeliers, the polished marble floors, and the vast halls. But Edward noticed something extraordinary. She didn't stare with envy or greed. She simply whispered, "It's beautiful," as if appreciating shelter itself. The staff prepared a room for her, but before she slept, she told Edward part of her story. Her parents had died young, leaving her to fend for herself. She had worked hard at factories and small shops, but when an accident left her injured, she couldn't keep a steady job. One by one, her options vanished until the streets became her only home. Yet, even in her hardship, Edward saw no bitterness, only resilience. That night, when Anna finally slept in a warm bed, Edward stood by the doorway and whispered to himself, "Perhaps this is the miracle I've been waiting for." The next morning, Edward did something he hadn't done in years. He cooked breakfast with his own hands. When Anna came downstairs wearing a borrowed dress, she was shocked to find him at the stove, fumbling with an apron. They laughed at his clumsy attempts, and in that laughter, Edward felt something break free inside him. Over the days that followed, their bond deepened. Anna had a way of finding joy in the smallest things: the garden, the smell of coffee, the feel of sunlight through the windows. She reminded him that life was more than contracts and profits. He took her to the library, where she confessed she used to love reading. Watching her eyes light up at the sight of books touched him in ways money never had. Edward's friends began to notice. Some mocked him, saying a millionaire had lost his senses over a beggar girl. But Edward ignored them. He didn't care what they saw. When they looked at Anna, they saw a homeless woman. When he looked at her, he saw courage, dignity, and a strength that humbled him. The real test came when Edward's empire stumbled. A massive business deal collapsed, threatening to ruin everything he had built. His advisors panicked, investors pulled away, and the media circled like vultures. For the first time in decades, Edward felt fear. Sitting in his study, head in his hands, he whispered, "It's over." That's when Anna entered. She placed her hand gently on his shoulder and said, "You still have what matters most, you. When I had nothing, I still had myself. You taught me to believe that again. Now you must believe it too." Her words cut through his despair. For the first time, Edward realized his worth was not measured in millions but in the impact he had on others. With renewed determination, he re-entered the business world, not as a cold tycoon but as a man transformed. He rebuilt, this time with purpose. He created foundations for the homeless, scholarships for the poor, and shelters for those like Anna. Each project wasn't just an investment of money but of heart. And through it all, Anna stood beside him, not as charity but as his equal. One evening, as rain fell softly on the streets where they had first met, Edward stopped under a street lamp and turned to her. He gazed into the same eyes that had once asked for leftovers and whispered, "You asked me for scraps, but you gave me a feast for the soul. You saved me." Tears glistened in her eyes as she smiled, and in that moment, they both knew the miracle wasn't wealth, fame, or success. The miracle was love, found in the most unexpected place, between a lonely millionaire and a girl who had lost everything but her dignity. Edward's story didn't end there. As the months turned into years, the bond between him and Anna only grew stronger. She became his confidant, his partner in every sense. Though the world continued to gossip, Edward no longer cared. The man who had once sat in the grandest restaurants feeling emptiness now woke each morning with purpose. Anna had awakened in him a desire to live, not just exist. She had given him what no amount of wealth could purchase, love that was real, raw, and unshakable. Anna, too, transformed. With Edward's support, she returned to the library and began studying again. She found herself drawn to helping others, volunteering at shelters and mentoring young women who had suffered as she had. She no longer felt invisible. People who once walked past her without a glance now listened when she spoke. And each time she shared her story, she reminded others that dignity could survive even the harshest storms. Their partnership blossomed not in extravagance but in simplicity. Edward discovered joy in the ordinary, morning walks, shared meals, laughter over small mistakes. For a man who once measured life in profits, this was the true wealth he had been searching for. And for Anna, who once measured days in hunger and loneliness, this was the miracle she had prayed for silently beneath the stars. Years later, Edward hosted a grand event at one of his foundations. Politicians, celebrities, and journalists attended. As he stepped onto the stage, he introduced Anna not as a guest or as a story of charity, but as his wife and partner. The hall fell silent, then erupted in applause. Anna stood tall beside him, no longer the girl who asked for leftovers but the woman who had transformed a millionaire's life. That night, Edward whispered to her, "The first time I saw you, I thought I was giving you something. But in truth, you gave me everything." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and replied, "And all I wanted was a little food. I never imagined I'd find a home in someone's heart." Together, they proved that miracles don't always come in flashes of lightning or dramatic twists of fate. Sometimes, they arrive quietly, in the form of a simple request at a dinner table, a pair of eyes that refuse to give up, and a heart finally willing to listen. And from that single moment of kindness, a story was born that would inspire countless others, that sometimes, giving away your leftovers can change not just one life, but two, forever.